Hi, everybody, and welcome to Precise Mistakes. You can find us every Friday night at 7 o'clock live if you're watching this recorded. Tonight, we're going to be discussing getting started in 3D printing and having a general discussion, basically like a shop talk on it. So stay tuned. Oh, I do that every week. My thing runs in the background. All right. So, so we're going to be talking about 3D printers this week. A couple weeks ago, we talked about CNC machines. And so just to let everybody know, in the next few shows, it's going to be design concepts and production type machines. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, you might want to stay tuned and subscribe to or like Precise Mistakes on Facebook. That'll keep you up to date with what's going on. Everybody, first of all, before I mention anybody, everything in the show notes below, there's links for everything. So everybody's seen the panel here. If somebody's talking and you want to check out some of their stuff, which I recommend, go down the show notes below and click their link and subscribe. Check them later after the show. Joking. So anyway, with that said, welcome everybody to the show tonight. I appreciate you coming out, and maybe we'll go around and we'll start with Charles there. You can introduce yourself, give a little background into your perspective of 3D printers, and kind of how you use them, or just a little overview.
Cool. So I'm Charles Gantt. I own a website called The Maker's Workbench, and for the last almost decade, I've been 3D printing. I was part of the RepRap project way back in the day that designed the first desktop 3D printers, and I've just been doing that for the last since 2009 anyway. So I own probably 10 printers total, maybe 3 work. These days I only use pre-made printers. I don't build my own printers anymore. It's just not worth it. And yeah, that's it.
Well, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Next we'll go over to Michelle with the cool helmet, or the skull that just appeared.
The skull. I'm Michelle Sleeper. I'm the artist at Overworld Designs. We do props and costumes and special effects and fabrication sort of thing for TV, film, cosplay, etc. Turn that down a little bit. And this is an example of one of the things that we make. This is a skull from a character from the video game Fallout 4. This is actually going to be like a customized armor piece. So in my shop, we have 6 3D printers total, and a lot of what we do starts as 3D prints. I have been 3D printing since 2010, and I've used tons of different 3D printing technologies out there. It's a technology I really love, and I build my own machines, and they're great. I love 3D printing.
Welcome aboard.
Yeah.
We'll dig more into that in a little bit. Thank you. Next up, we have Javi. I said it wrong a couple times. I think it's Javi.
Close enough. That's it, actually.
Oh, we got some echo.
Someone's echoing. It's a beautiful thing. My name is Javier Unzueta, otherwise known as Javi from Javi's Woodshop. I'm semi-retired. I've owned a sign business and a few others businesses in the past, and I've worked with CNC for quite a bit in the form of lasers, rotary engravers, vinyl cutters, etc. But I am a complete noob when it comes to 3D printing. In fact, just 2 days ago, a friend of mine gave me his old Monoprice, so I'm looking forward to the show.
Nice.
Oh, you can find me on YouTube under Javi's Woodshop.
I don't know how noob you are, but just for full disclosure here, I looked at Matt's printer and figured out a couple little things and printed something. That's pretty much it. But they fascinate me as well. I'm interested in getting into them. Oh, welcome aboard, Javier. Javier. I keep wanting to say Javier, but is it Javier? Javier. There.
Now you got it.
Officially got it. Here we go. Javier. Thanks. Next up, Matt Brander. Matt, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, how's everyone doing tonight? Yeah, you can find me at, of course, Building with Brander on Facebook and YouTube, and on Twitter, I guess I'm still as the Bearded Woodworker. That's pretty much it. I picked up a machine there 2 or 3 weeks ago, and have been pretty addicted to it ever since. So, looking to learn a lot about it and expand my knowledge in that direction.
Yeah, the really cool thing about getting that machine is being able to print, seeing all the parts to print to upgrade it, making it a better system. So you buy it cheap. You know, it takes a lot of legwork, but yeah, it's really cool.
Yep.
Sorry,
go ahead.
This is what happens when 2 Canadians run into a bind here. Sorry. Yeah, but that machine, it's pretty exciting. It gets me excited too on just being able to upgrade itself and seeing the potential to 3D printing and what we can actually output. It's really cool.
I'm excited to try to use that machine to its max. It has a pretty decent sized bed for a small machine, so I'm really excited to see how far we can actually push it.
Cool. Welcome aboard. Next up, we got Matt and Manring. Zach. Talk to Matt.
Yeah, so I'm Zach from the Southern Ginger Workshop. I have my website at southernginger.com. You can find me on YouTube and all the other social stuff. My experience on 3D printing has only been a few days as well. I have the quintessential Monoprice that everybody else seems to have, and I come from the world of CNC, so this is just something new. I've had the same printing pretty much nonstop, so I got about 8 or 10 things I've printed already just playing with it. So I'm interested in learning as well.
Cool.
So, thanks for having me.
That's a perfect segue into the opening discussion point for tonight, which is 3D printing basics. So if I were new, which I am, getting into 3D printing, like you mentioned, we got some lower end systems. We've got some higher end systems. Maybe if somebody will start off where if we're looking to buy a 3D printer, what kind of things are we looking for? Do we want to look for the cheap one? Is that one going to suffice? Is it as good quality? What are the differences, kind of thing? And maybe I'll pick on someone who has a little more experience in 3D printing here. If Michelle, you want to jump up, or Charles.
Sure, yeah. Whenever I talk, I've done classes where getting people interested in 3D printing or I guess teaching them about the technology. And the thing that I always tell people who have no idea about it or know very little about it is, number one, there's no such thing as a machine that works all the time, 100% of the time, never has problems. That just doesn't exist. The example that I use is like paper printers. That technology has been around for 50 or 60 years, and paper printers still suck. The difference is that they're so cheap that when they break, you throw them away and buy a new one. 3D printers are fundamentally the same technology of how a paper printer works, just with another D, and you just get kind of similar problems. And then the other thing that I will try and tell people is there's really no such thing as the best printer. There's machines that have different benefits over others. Generally speaking, especially to like this crowd, I really recommend buying a kit. Because when you get a box of parts and you're putting it together, you really intimately know the machine, so that when something inevitably needs to be tuned or tweaked, or there's damage that needs to be repaired, you have an understanding of the machine, rather than you buy a machine you open the box and there it is, and something goes wrong and you don't know what's up, and you have to call customer support or send it out. So those are my 2 suggestions anytime I talk to someone new.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I said I can't echo that statement enough. I won't call it a living, but I've made a lot of money over the years repairing people's 3D printers that just bought a printer and had no idea how to fix it when it broke. And like Michelle said, they will break. There's no doubt that every printer out there is going to break. Even the $100,000 stuff you buy from Stratus and stuff's going to break eventually. So I mean, one of my buddies who's probably watching right now, remember, he used to own a design company, and they had a couple maker bots, and they spent more having me repair their maker bots than they paid for them.
Huh.
So,
Yeah, so like I was saying before, there's 6 machines in my shop, and at any given point in time, at least one of them needs to be loved on a little. So that's one of the benefits of having, for what I do, where I need them all working on a single large project. I can work on one while the others are working, and then one of them has a problem, so I move to that one. And I think now we just had a couple of events, and this is the point where all of them are working pretty well. So that'll last for a couple weeks, maybe, hopefully.
On that subject, you know, pointing out how starting off with a kit is a good way to do it. Matt, where you just put together a kit, do you want to share your experiences on that as a brand new 3D printer user and assembler, builder, maker?
Yeah, that was actually, I want to call it, I'm going to say it was a fantastic experience being able to put together the machine and, you know, as was mentioned, get to know it very intimately as you're doing that. And one thing about doing that was I wanted to know, just in case the thing does break, in case there's something wrong with it, if I need to modify it, if I want to upgrade it, I want to be able to do that very confidently and know that I can take the whole thing apart and put it back together at any time if I need to. And that was one of the really good things about it. Also, you know, just a couple weeks after doing it, I brought the thing on a road trip up to your place, set it back up, and sure enough, the bed wasn't heating up. Well, right away I knew which exact cord it is on that board that is the one that relates to heating the bed. So I had a little check there. Of course, I think it came disconnected en route at some point. Connect that back in. Besides, that was the only thing that actually went wrong with it in that entire travel. And it's we're an hour drive back and forth for an hour there and an hour back worth of driving on it. And since I got it back, I've had no issues with it whatsoever. We did have to re-level it again, of course, but that's, if you move the thing almost any time, you can expect you're going to have to re-level it. So yeah, no, it was great to be able to intimately get to know it. That was the process, and that was kind of the reason that I bought a kit, besides the fact that I am cheap. But at the same time, for the price that I paid for mine, I could have got that mono select for the same price. And this was just, I'd rather get to know it.
Well, that's something, talking about price. I assumed when you got it, at it being at such a low price, obviously you're going to get a low quality print. It's not going to be high, you know, it's not going to be as good as something you would spend more money on, even, you know, like $500, $600, $800 range. But in printing it, and now I'm speaking with never using one, not owning one, other than yours, it looks good to me. And it, compared to what I watch with, you know, when I watch 3D printing on YouTube and I'm researching different aspects of it, they look pretty much the same before they get washed down or fogged down or something. But and maybe that's something else, you guys, Michelle or Charles, you could chime in on, like the differences in quality that should expect with these.
Just real quick before you do that, I have seen my machine, and I'll even up that a little bit. I've seen the quality that comes into my machine go up against a machine that's easily $800, $1,200, $1,800, and I've seen some of those come out and fail and look like garbage in the videos that I'm watching. You know, first straight off. And this thing, for when I first put it together, I couldn't believe how well it actually worked.
Yeah, very clean.
Oh, you go ahead.
Sorry. You know, that is true to a certain extent, that the price dictates the quality. And I find that to be more true on the pre-built printers. I don't want to say any specific names, but you know, some of the cheaper pre-built, you know, little cube style printers, they're really cheap, but the quality on them also suffers a lot. And sometimes when they break, you can't fix them because they're built out of proprietary parts. But the kits, in my experience, at least the kits I've built, as long as you spend the time it takes to tune them and, you know, make sure everything is just precise as it can be and dialed in, you'll get great prints. Like specifically like the $150 to $200 Prusa i3 clones that are all over eBay and all the other little cheap sites. You know, they're as good as how much time you want to put into them, and how much upgrades you want to, you know, print with the printer or stuff you want to buy. I built one a couple years ago for one of my buddies, my buddy Will, and I didn't have a lot of high expectations for it because it was a $200 3D printer kit. It was like the first time they'd hit $200, and I spent probably 2 days building it, just on and off in my free time, and then I spent another week tuning it in. And when we were done with it, it was printing better than my Lulz bot that cost me $2,300. And it really is all about how much time you want to put into sitting down and tweaking things in the firmware and tweaking actual physical parts on the printer to get things dialed in just right.
Maybe that could be another point to why you'd want to build it, or to reiterate that point, is you get to know those little fine-tuning things in order to get yourself calibrated to that point.
That's definitely true. The one of the biggest things that a lot of people overlook with these printers is, a lot of them run off a belt system, a belt system, and those belts stretch over time. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have your belts tight enough, or you got too much buildup on your smooth rods and stuff, you're going to get inaccuracies as things move around. So it's not just tuning it once; it's staying with it and making sure that it's always up to the specs you set it up at.
What about plastics? Different types of plastics, Charles and Michelle. What are the easiest to use? What are the different features of each? I'm kind of curious to know about those.
So I would say the easiest to use is probably PLA. It's pretty foolproof. It has a very specific. It's very simple to use. You can't really mess it up, or rather, your prints aren't going to fail because of the properties of it. For a long time, ABS was like the leader in what everyone was using, and as different materials came out, people moved away from it because ABS has shrinking issues, which turn into layer separation or a big part curling off the bed. Because you have to think about what ABS is and how it was engineered. It was meant for, injection molding manufacturing, where you want it to shrink off your die so that your injection mold can go back together. PLA doesn't have layer separation. It doesn't shrink when it cools like that. Now, the downsides to it, in my experience, is that it's a lot more brittle, so that ABS isn't flexible, but if you put it under high stress, it's not going to crack, whereas PLA will totally crack whenever it's put under a high stress like that, which is why the 3D printers that have 3D printed parts in them are almost always ABS. The other downside is the low printing temperature. Means that if you leave it in your dashboard in the Atlanta heat, then it will totally melt while it's sitting there.
Sounds like experience.
Yeah, it's hilarious when you see it, except if you really needed the thing you left in your car and now it's a bunch of slag. A lot of people do prefer PLA over other materials because while it's printing, it doesn't have a distinctly burning plastic smell. ABS is really bad about that. If you are leaving it in like your living room, or if you have a small garage and you leave it in there, and you leave and you come back like 20 minutes later, your garage is going to smell like burning plastic, because that's what you're doing, is you're melting plastic. People say that PLA smells like pancakes. I don't entirely agree, but I know what they're saying.
And what about you said ABS stinks? Is that during the melting process, or how long after?
It's done printing, it's totally inert. It's just that while it's melting, it smells exactly like what burning plastic smells like.
Right. Like the when we used to set the little the pieces from the models on fire with the lighters when we were young. Exactly.
Yeah. Now there's tons of other materials. The world of 3D printing materials is completely full with exotic materials and different types of material blends. There's PLA blends with anything you can think of. There's PLA with wood in it, with copper in it. There's magnetic or conductive filament, so that you can make traces that are conductive and, in theory, make electronics with it. I've never seen that really done, but the theory's there. And then there's materials like nylons, which are those are very good in specific circumstances. I don't use them, so I don't have a lot of info I can give there, but they do exist. And then there's weird materials like this material called Ninja Flex, or its family of what are called TPU filaments that are super squishy, and they're soft and flexible. And like if you have like a little a figure printed in like Ninja Flex, you can squish it like it's a sponge. It's cool.
Huh.
And it doesn't fall down on itself while it's being created?
Nope. Now, granted, you have to have a specific part of the machine.
The support.
Well, no. So the way that the actual printing part works is there's what's called the cold end that pushes your material into the hot end, which is what makes it melt. And
Right.
you need a specific setup to do materials that are more flexible, because the typical way that materials are fed don't work with soft materials or stretchy materials like that. Aside from that, then while it's printing, it's totally stable. And when you like smash it and everything and squeeze it, it'll go back to its shape when you're done with it.
Yeah, that's cool.
I don't know if it's the same stuff, but Joel Teller, 3D Printing Nerd, he did an interview at Maker Faire, and he was talking about shoes that were developed, sneakers. Now they aren't like, you know, house ready, like regular people ready, but wow, that really pops the mind onto the type of impact this is going to have on the industry, the economy, and the way we look at even, like, if I want to buy a solution to something, I might not necessarily go to a store in 10 years.
Yeah, it's funny. Charles was saying that some of the parts were proprietary, and I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, you got a machine that can make them.
Oh yeah, I can't tell you the number of times that a part on something will fail and I need a new one, and I either can't buy it because the company or the machine doesn't exist anymore, or it's going to be prohibitively expensive to go buy it. For instance, Elliot, my assistant, who set this whole meeting up, thank you, by the way, Elliot. One of his very first 3D printing projects was the AC dial in his car broke. So we pulled the other one off, like took a handful of measurements, made it in what I think it was Inventor we used at the time. And like 30 minutes later, he has a new knob. Like, you can't beat that. Now, in my opinion, a lot of people say that 3D printing is the future and it's going to solve this idea of needing to buy things when you can just make them at your house. And if you use a 3D printer more than a dozen times, you'll understand that that's not entirely true. I don't think that 3D printing is going to save the world, but I think that 3D printing is going to lead to a technology that will get us there. So you're talking about 3D printing new shoes, and you can kind of do that, but there's a reason they're called rapid prototyping machines.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing nowadays, too, there's also another set of machines that there's a pool of resin that sits at the bottom. There's a laser and some other technology that gets dipped into the resin, and as it pulls out, the 3D, whatever you want to 3D print is going to come right out of it, as you see. Now, obviously, when you watch the ones on video, it's very sped up, and it doesn't happen as fast as you see. But they also have that same type of material that you're talking about earlier. You can take it, you can scrunch it up into a ball, then let it go, and it comes back out to like a lattice sheet.
Yeah. Yeah, so the technology you're referring to is called SLA, which stands for something I can't immediately remember, but it'll come to me in something. Yeah.
It's more than I can remember.
Yeah. And that's different than what 99% of what people think of as 3D printing, which is FDM printing. SLA is like an order of magnitude everything more than FDM. It's an order of magnitude higher detail, an order of magnitude more expensive, and more time. The machines like that, like the Form 2, you can be able to print with such a high detail that you can't see the layer difference, and if you rub your finger over it, you can't feel it. But a little thing that's 2 inches tall that is up to that detail will take 20 hours to print, and will be $30 a material. So there's trade-offs there.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
my experience with the SLA stuff is there's a lot of consumable parts other than just the resin. Like the vessel that holds the resin is only good for so many prints because the laser shoots through the bottom of it, and eventually it clouds it up to the point that you can't print a good print anymore. And I had a Form 1 for a while, and I think I might have gotten 10 good prints out of it because I never used it because it took so long to print something. You know, if I wanted to wow somebody, like, hey, check out this cool thing I made, I would use it. But other than that, it was just so expensive to use that even printing like something the size of a golf ball would cost me $20. And it just wasn't worth it to me. And eventually I got rid of it. It wasn't actually mine. It was a buddy's, but I gave it back to him. And I think he sold it right after that too.
Yeah, the SLA printers are great, but I agree that they don't have the like immediate draw factor that FDM printers do. Because I can sit here and print little trinkets, little figures in like 30 minutes. And that's fast enough that if someone's here, they could be here to be given it. And they can enjoy watching it because there's obvious progress being made. Whereas SLA printers, like you're just watching this box for, I don't think I've seen an SLA printer have less than like a 10-hour print time. Now, but in cases like where what I'm doing where I need high detail products and this is part of a whole and this is going to be nearly the finished product, that's the type of technology that's great for me. There's another artist in my team. He does like robot figures, and this is perfect for him because he does custom action figures. And this is exactly what SLA printing will do. It'll give you high detail, pretty small parts. Granted, it's going to be a lot longer and a lot more expensive.
I'm curious. Are there machines out there that do addition and subtractive? In other words, like a 3D printer in combination with a CNC machine, which will shave out parts? Because there's advantages and disadvantages to each. I was just curious if there was something like that out.
So there are a couple, but the process isn't as simple as you 3D print a part and then it changes tool heads and you start machining on the part you just 3D printed. They require like you to break down the printer and change the tool head out. And I guess if you can find your zero precisely perfectly again, then yes. I haven't used any of them. I think I forgot the name of the company that makes the most popular one right now, but they have like 5 different heads for it, including a laser cutter head for it. And they're a really great concept, but I think in practice they fail because they're designed to do one specific operation, not combine the operations together. So if you want to laser etch something, you put the head on and put what you want to etch down, or if you want to print something, then you put the printer head on, or if you want to CNC route something out, you put that head on and then put your stock down. They're not really designed to do all the operations together to make one single part.
Right.
I think when somebody comes out with that kind of printer, like that will actually go through all those motions, is when the game actually changes. Like Michelle was just talking about, like this technology is just a stepping stone to something better.
Right. That'll be a fantastic tool for prototyping.
Definitely.
We have somebody asking in the chat, what is a good printer for a new?
Zach, you mentioned you're looking to get into 3D printing. You said you have one on order?
Yeah, I actually have the Monoprice already. I've already printed about 9 different things for it. Just different upgrades. Like new knobs and stuff like that. Stuff that typical people do. The one that I'm kind of messing around with right now is I'm actually printing little mounts for my GoPro, which it's like I like those kind of things. The functional things really work out well. They're small enough you can print them all day long. You like little holders for your SD cards. They're simple enough, and they're just kind of nice to have. Yep, just like that guy. So yeah, I mean, I was fortunate. I plugged it in, I leveled the bed, and I just started printing. I literally, that's all I did, because I wanted to see what's the default settings do, what does it get me? And I printed the cat like everybody else does, and worked out pretty well. And then from there, I got an orange spool, and I've just been printing ever since. So
there's a channel, Print 3D Noob. What's it, Matt? I stole it from Matt.
Noob 3D printer, I think it is.
Noob 3D printing. Oh,
gotcha.
Anyway, he does a really good review on, and you just made me think of it, on using different fans, different lengths of, yeah. So he's putting the fan on it for different amounts of speed. So he'll turn it up a little quicker each time and print the same thing over and over. He does a lot of tests like that, so you can see the differences in how it affects the material, which, as Michelle was referring to, there's an in-depth. Obviously, you need to know your materials. You need to know, how if you get used to PLA, then you're going to need to move. You move to something else. You're going to need to understand that material, and it's a whole other testing. Anyway, all that said, I was just wondering, have you done any testing or anything like that, or?
I haven't done any testing with the fan itself. One of the things that I have noticed is when my ceiling fan is on, I get different results. So I don't know if you guys have experienced that too, but maybe for something so small that I have noticed that issue. What's
your material?
PLA.
That's actually surprising. I don't print a lot in PLA, but when I have, I've not really had ambient air temperature affected like that. I know that that's a huge factor with ABS. To the point where when I had one of my printers at home, I was printing a really tall object, and you could see where my AC kicked in.
Interesting.
Every now and then. There was this obvious layer separation. It was very regular, and that's the only thing that happened during that time. It might be a matter of how small that you're printing. The layer that you're currently printing may not have time to cool down, and so it's not able to print properly. You can try slowing your printing speeds down. Maybe try turning your temperature down a little. Your materials will have a range of which they will operate best in. But it's probably either you're printing too fast, or in the case of PLA, do you have a fan on your hot end?
Yeah.
You may need to up the fan speed as well. Basically, it's probably just too hot, and it needs to cool down a little before it can print.
Because I'm also finding that it's starting to, it could be adhesion to the actual plate itself, but I'm also noticing it's starting to peel up a little bit in the corners. And that's after
onto, like, what is your bed surface?
It's just the tape that it came with.
Okay. You can try putting down like a glue stick.
Okay.
I know that works really well when you print directly onto glass.
Okay.
That it may not work with the blue tape. I'm not sure. Bed adhesion is like a whole topic unto itself. You have everyone who swears by their own method. In my case, there's this material called PEI, which is this like space age plastic that is amazing for 3D printing. The plastics will stick onto it while it's printing, and as soon as it cools off, you can like hear it pop off.
Interesting.
Yeah, but you kind of have to like set up your whole machine to use it, and it's a little bit of a process to convert to it. It's not difficult, but if you've ever tried to apply like a big like vinyl wrap or sticker without getting any bubbles under it, it's like that, except more frustrating because you can't peel it up.
Gotcha. Well, there is an upgrade kit for this to put glass. So is that something that I should look at doing?
Do you have a heated bed?
I do.
Yeah, I think glass is great. I mean, we're talking about leveling, and the #1 upgrade I suggest to everyone is add an auto leveling feature to your machine.
Okay.
There's a bunch of different ways out there. The technology that I use uses an inductive sensor. So your bed needs to be a metal plate. So all of my print beds are just aluminum, machined aluminum plates, so that they're an even thickness and an exact dimension. And the way the auto leveling works is, it's kind of not too dissimilar to how you do it manually, where you check the height at each of the 4 corners and you change your thumb screws. Whereas, it will measure the height the head is away of each of the 4 corners, and will move the print head up and down to be the exact same distance for every layer.
Right, so it could actually be uneven, but the actual G code changes itself.
Exactly, yeah. You can watch it move the print head up and down to follow how unlevel it is. So for that reason, I use aluminum, but before I used aluminum, I used glass, and glass is great. You definitely want borosilicate because you're working with really high temperatures. You will only, definitely try going to glass. For PLA, you will probably want to put down glue stick or something to help the adhesion. That should really help out.
So I just wanted to hop in with one place where, like, when you're having issues like this, obviously we're not all on a hangout all the time to be able to jump in and say, hey, here's how you fix your printer. I've been the admin of a Facebook group called 3D Printing Club for about 5 years now. We have a great group of admins, but the club's got over 30,000 members in it. And you can just go there, sign up to be a member, and anytime you have a question, just post it, and there'll be tens or dozens of replies on what you can do to fix your specific issue from people with your exact printer that have been through what you're going through. Gotcha. Yeah, I am part of another club that's just this printer, but yeah, I'll definitely join. We probably own that club too. We own like a lot of them on Facebook at this point. One other thing too is, moisture in your PLA will affect your adhesion and your print process too. And that's the reason I'm like Michelle. I don't print in PLA at all. I'm an ABS only person. I actually find it easier to print with ABS than I do PLA, and I think that's just because I've been doing it for so long. But I prefer ABS over PLA. Okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah, if your PLA, if your spool has been sitting in an unopened container for a long time, and if you're in a really humid area, it's probably absorbed water. If you're not actively using that spool, or rather, if you know you're not going to be using it for a few days, you can get desiccant and just get a little plastic Tupperware container and put your spool in it with some silica desiccant, and that'll be enough to save it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think I have a bag of that.
That's good to know.
That's what we've seen. 3D printers, the cheaper end kit's good to start with, and PLA is a pretty versatile starting material. Now let's move into how to make things. So you get your printer, you got to put together, you got your material, you're all set to go. What do I do now? How do I get something printing? Do I have to learn some software? Do I have to, what are the types of avenues I can take to start using my 3D printer?
I go straight to Thingiverse.
Thingiverse. Why would you go to Thingiverse?
Because it's got tons of shit already made up on there. There's tons of almost anything. You can type in anything within their search and have it come up. Somebody else has already designed it. It's already ready to go. Just got to throw it through the slicer, and then you're off to the races.
And Thingiverse is really great, and there's a host of other sites like that. My Mini Factory is another site that has a ton of pre-made things, but you are going to get so much more use and life out of your machine if you're able to make your own models. As a small case, I have under my workbench is a power strip that is constantly moving around and pisses me off all the time. So I just need to measure it, how wide it is, bring it into my 3D modeling program, and make a little bracket to screw down. And there's a bunch of 3D modeling programs that are pretty easy to get into. I know that Fusion 360 is kind of like the new hot program for everyone to use. It's pretty easy to learn, and it's really powerful. There are others that I can't really recommend too highly, either because they're clunky to learn or support for them is questionable. But being able to make your own models without having to rely on what someone else has made is going to make the reason you have the machine, it's just going to completely open up avenues for you.
Yeah, I agree, and you know, I'll touch on one other program, and it's SketchUp. I used SketchUp for many years for designing for 3D printing, and the day that I figured out Fusion 360, I uninstalled SketchUp for my computer. SketchUp's a good way if you're familiar with designing like woodworking projects or whatever, because I know a lot of woodworkers are listening to us right now. It's great for designing that stuff, and it's okay for designing 3D printing stuff, but the one thing when whatever program you're designing in, your model has to be what they call manifold, and that means it's watertight. So you can't have where two corners meet, you can't have like one corner higher than the other, so you have like a floating hole in your model and stuff like that. And for the most part, Fusion 360 takes care of that, but if you're using a program like SketchUp or Tinkercad or any of the other programs that are out there, you really have to be conscious of how watertight your model is. So, I mean, that's about the only thing I have to offer on that topic.
I didn't even know you could use SketchUp for that. Can they produce STL files? And
there's some plugins. If you search for SketchUp STL converter, I think is the string I used. There's a website that's dedicated to guitar building, of all things, that has the owners of the site made a SketchUp plugin that will export to STL, and it's free. You have to find it. I'm not even sure if it's compatible with the latest version of SketchUp. I mean, I haven't used SketchUp in a couple months now.
I thought SketchUp was just for show. I didn't realize it would. That's funny.
Yeah. Now, the one thing is when you're in SketchUp, you have to check your I forgot what they exactly call it, but it's entity. I think it's your entity solids or something like that in SketchUp. And when there's just a little menu where you can pull down and check entity solids or something like that, and it will tell you if your model is watertight and manifold. Because you won't actually be able to use an exporting program to export it via STL if it's not watertight.
Right.
So I'm using Fusion 360 for like a month now. It's pretty intuitive to learn. It's not as hard as it was intimidating to approach. But once you get into it, there's so many tutorials on how to do things, and if you just jump into it and kind of go on YouTube and go, how do I do this? It'll show you. People will show you. There's videos. There's so much out on and on any program. But I'm used to Fusion 360, and I've found it a really easy way to get in, and it does open the whole playground to what you can produce. Though Thingiverse, as Matt mentioned, is really good to just like, you can go and you can just download one, and you put it through a program which is called slicing, and it turns it into a G code, which you can then put to your 3D printer or whatever your 3D printer takes, STL file or what it is. Anyway, just want to throw that out there.
What would you guys recommend for the slicing program?
I've still used Slicer. I know it's not the most popular program anymore, but I use Slicer. I've used Cura and a couple of others, and I just always go back to Slicer because it's kind of what I've been ingrained in for the last half decade.
Yeah, I use Cura.
Yeah, that's Slicer with a 3 instead of an E, which is confusing because your Slicer is Slicer, as opposed to your Slicer is Cura or your Slicer is Simplify 3D. I used Slicer for a really long time, and I feel like there's all of these features and all these options you can set, and there's very little documentation about what they actually do. So you can get bogged down trying to like fine tune your printing process and waste hours trying to work on the software side and not know what you're really doing. So I mostly use Cura because I find that it's intuitive enough that I don't have to mess with settings too often, but open enough that I can go into the advanced mode and change things as I might need. I don't know if anyone here uses it, but Simplify 3D is a really popular option. I've not used it mostly because I can't justify spending $120 on a piece of software that does one little thing. But I've heard that people, especially in doing like costuming type stuff, really like it because it's very powerful and really easy to use. So if you're wanting something a little more accessible, I guess, Simplify 3D might be for you, but it is not free, whereas the rest of these softwares are.
And just to clear it up for people who might not know what it is, what exactly is slicing anyway?
So slicing, okay, so let's say I'm holding a model of a print called Benchy. And slicing basically takes your 3D model and slices it in layers. So each layer is the same layer height as a layer in the final model. So it goes through and plots the tool paths for each layer, that the printer's going to make.
And that's where you'd set things like the heat, the temperature of the bed.
Yeah, you could set that. You would set things like your layer height, your your infill percentage, stuff like that.
And you can change that during the. I mean, from one layer to another, because I know with the CNC, sometimes when you're doing shortcuts, it basically it slows down.
So I can't really speak for anything other than Slicer because that's what I've been using for so long. But Joseph Prusa, the guy who invented the original Prusa i3, he just released his own version of Slicer that allows you to vary things by layer like that. But for the most part, I think most of the programs, it's whatever you said, it's going to be every layer.
To my knowledge, the Prusa Slicer edition is the only one that will do that. That will allow you to have different settings per each layer.
That's cool.
Part of that is because you don't really think of your model in terms of how many layers is it going to be. You worry more about quality, where I have this little thing, I need it to be of high quality, not I need it to be 200 layers. Because when you are looking at these models, it's definitely dozens or hundreds of layers tall. The other reason you might not want to do that is because in my frankly limited experience using the Prusa Slicer edition, it's not very good at doing it.
And I was going to ask, is it actually necessary? Because every 3D printer I've ever seen is travels so slow. I guess a variation in speed doesn't really. I don't think it would affect anything.
Yeah, I can't really imagine an instance where I would need a part that I'm printing to have different quality settings or layer height or infill density on a layer by layer basis.
What about using like a multi-material print though?
So that starts getting into an entirely separate way of thinking. Using a multi-head printer, you have to have your slicing software has to be able to even recognize doing that and how to function, how to process each material. There are instances where you're printing in two materials to serve in two entirely different purposes. The most common reason you have a multi-material printer is so that you can print your actual part in one material and then have a high amount of support material in a different material type that you can easily break away or chemically dissolve. Because if you're trying to print something that has, if you imagine like a number 4, right? The part over here you can't print because you're printing in the middle of the air. So in order to print that, in order to print a big arm or an awning like that, you have to print literal supports. So the machine is going to make a big stack of stuff just for the thing to sit onto. Now you get some quality loss where your part and your support material interface. And a way that you can get better at that is by having solid infill using a material that can be dissolved away or washed away or something like that. So I don't, but again, you're still printing in like the same layer heights, and your support material kind of almost prints entirely differently anyway. It's very minimal. You don't really need anything there. It's just a stack of layers for it to print in.
There was one, and I might be wrong. I can't remember exactly if it was a concept or if it was a fact that it was printed. But it was a solid material, and then it had a rubber, and then it was solid. So it would be flexible but hard on the ends. And so that's kind of what I was thinking, but I don't know if that's an actual. I can't remember because I've too much information in.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen that. That definitely sounds possible using a machine with multiple print heads. Excuse me. And yeah, you could do something where you print some sections in a rigid material and then use something flexible like TPU or Ninja Flex to make your like nunchuck springs or whatever. But again, I've not done that, so I can't really speak to that from experience.
I remember seeing something similar to that at CES a couple years ago, but what I actually don't think their printer was printing it. I think what they were doing was gluing the layers together, because the examples I saw from the 3 printers they had set up, none of them had dual materials on them, but they were touting how, they bonded, the rubber stuff and the hard stuff together. But I don't know if that ever actually came to fruition or if it was just a, hey, we're at a trade show, check out this cool thing we did kind of thing.
Well, with that said, now we know, the basic kit to buy and start on PLA and all the kind of things around all that, and the, how to get started with that stuff. Maybe let's talk about, spend the last 10 minutes, and I want to jump right into Michelle here to start, is how you use it. Because you started off the show explaining that you use it in a lot of different interesting ways. And I'm kind of interested in seeing like what you meant by that. Like, is that 3D molded, or that the prop you have beside you there, you make props and things. Do you make things for like molds? Do you make things, or is that like 3D printed in parts and glued together?
Sure. So this right here, I'll try and grab a couple of things. Do we have the Gromfmite rifle? Yeah, go grab that. So like I said, this is a piece that's going to be ultimately a piece of armor. Now this is still the raw 3D print, and because I do a lot of special effects stuff, almost everything that goes through, I think it's up there. Oh no, it's behind the fan. Almost everything that comes into our studio, we do mold, because while 3D printing is great, it's kind of heavy and it's pretty brittle. You can just set them right there. And if I were to put this on the actual costume piece, and if it were to fall, it would totally break apart. It would break at the layers where how it's printing, it will break at the layers and it'll separate there. So it's nearly finished. We're going to be molding this later and making probably a cast resin or a wet fiberglass layup just for strength and for it to be lightweight. But as for the actual piece, we designed it to fit together like that using these little ball sockets. Now, the main reason for this is so that we can make the horns and the main skull out of different materials, and so that we don't have this gigantic, ungangly, impossible to use mold. And then, of course, if we are shipping this out or to a customer or whatnot, we'll be able to break it down more easily. Now, there's no such thing as a 3D printer that, well, at least not that you're going to be able to buy for a reasonable cost, that will print a piece this big in one go. And you can actually see where we had stuff in different layers. This was printed on a Lulzbot Taz 6, which is a pretty big printer, and printed in 3 big pieces. So the entire upper half of the face was printed in one piece, and then the 2 halves of the back. So again, this is going to be ultimately going to be molded and then cast into the material. But we do have other stuff. This is a rifle from the TV show Rick and Morty. This is probably going to stay a 3D print because we're not intending to take this any further. So this is about as far as we're going to go. We may paint it a little better and do some more weathering on it. But, we've already had problems. I don't know how well you guys might be able to see that, but there's definitely some layer separation in where we were binding the layers. And there's just no way to fix that. It's going to continuously start separating, breaking down, and I could put really minimal effort on here and snap it in half. So 3D printing, for what I do, is not really a great final product because it's heavy, it's not as strong as other materials, but it's a really good starting point. It definitely takes a lot of work. We've spent, I don't know how many hours working on that skull to get it to this point where when we finally cast it, it's going to look flawless.
Like how many times did you print that before?
This piece right here?
Your skull.
I mean, you're looking at the original parts here. Thankfully, we never had to reprint anything. Oh, how many pieces? So the skull, like I said, the main body was three parts. The face, this entire upper section was one piece. The back was in 2 halves, and then each of the horns were printed 2 pieces each.
Oh, I meant like you have a lot of trouble. You said you had a lot of trouble. Like it's not just like an instant. Here it is. Is it multiple prints or is it multiple efforts on the design process? Like.
So I've been doing this sort of thing for long enough that I kind of have a mind for taking our digital sculpt to a 3D printer and really kind of knowing how it's going to come out. A lot of that is experience. Also, a lot of it is being kind of playing it really safe and being really conservative in how much space in the machine I'm using, making sure if I have a long print, I always have a fresh spool on. Yeah, I'm not. I don't know if I answered you entirely there.
Well, maybe I just misunderstood you. I don't know.
Okay.
I was just. You said it takes a lot of attempts to get a final product before it's perfect. I think is what you're saying.
I think he's asking how many times did you fuck it up before you got there?
In general, or on this piece?
In general, I guess. It's just,
oh gosh, in general, hundreds. Like I have, whether it's I messed up on the part. I have a prop gun that I'm doing now that I've printed it and started putting it together, I kind of want to redesign it and reprint it all together so that it's going to not fall apart on me. Like I said, the skull, thankfully, I had a really big machine and I was able to be really conservative of how I designed it, how I cut it into sections and then put it together. And we haven't had any failures on this, which is a little abnormal, actually. Usually you will have parts that don't come out right, that fail entirely, that in the case of the gun that I just had, where it's falling apart or it's too weak in sections and will not be usable.
So that is like the first print of all those pieces that you made in that skull?
Yeah, this skull is the first attempt on each of these prints, the 3 here and then the 4 that are the horns.
Awesome.
Yeah.
The white that we can see on there, is that Bondo? Is that?
Yeah, so the 2 colors that you're seeing here, well, the black is the print itself.
The print, yeah.
And when you have a piece like this where you have large, long prints, because each of these prints was 20 to 30 hours. So just this right here that you're seeing would have taken longer than a weekend to print. That's the benefit of having multiple machines. I can set all of these to go at once, and instead of waiting 80 hours, I'm only spending 30. So the other part of that is I always try to stick to the exact same material from the exact same manufacturer, because you can totally get differences in black ABS from one manufacturer to the other. It'll either print differently, it'll have slightly different temperature behaviors. It may not bind, if this ABS and this ABS may not bind together as well as if these were the same material. So I print everything in black and I try to stick to the same company and really try not to change that so that I don't have to worry about, oh, my filament's being weird. So then the 2 colors that you're seeing there, besides that, this gray stuff that you can see here better, this is a filler primer. And the way that most of the sculpting on a 3D print will work is you'll do like your initial sanding to get rid of most of the print lines. I will then go over it with an ABS sludge, which is failed ABS prints or support material that's been dissolved in acetone. And then I add in methyl ethyl ketone. basically you're making homemade ABS cement. And what that does is it fills in the print lines like a body filler and chemically fuses the ABS in your sludge with the ABS on the print. So your part becomes a lot stronger. Then the gray that you're seeing is in the filler primer. And the filler primer will help get you the last little bits that are still stuck in there. You can see here in this section pretty good, where those are obviously print lines that either the MEK solution or the sanding didn't get rid of. So there's lots of that, lots of little sections like that all over. So it's a lot of sanding, it's a lot of filling. And in cases right here, you're right, this is Bondo, because there was a really big gap. The print curled off the bed a little bit, not enough that it warranted reprinting it, because we could fill this in and resculpt it. So this is, that's what all the materials are on it currently. It's about to have one more light sanding pass, maybe another primer coat, and then we're gonna take it to molding. So
the cool thing when it was first set down on the table, I actually thought it was some sort of a crazy fossil, and I thought the grayness was the weathering done on it. I was like, man, that looks so good. Turns out, awesome. No, we're only halfway through production on it. But no, kudos, it still looks awesome. You guys did a great job on that.
Thank you. Yeah. When we have the horns on it, it has such a much bigger presence to it, because most of the time I'm working on just the main skull, and it's still big. You can see how large this is. But when you start to put the horns on it, it takes this huge presence. And people will look at something like this and not believe that it's 3D printed, because they're not used to seeing a 3D printed part this large. And the secret is you don't print it all at once.
Yeah.
I think we need a whole show on talking about some post-production or post-print process.
That's definitely a show in its own.
At this point, though, we are over time, but I do want to go around everybody and just get how you use ways to use a 3D printer and some ideas for people out there getting into it on ways they can use the 3D printer and what it can do for them. If you just want to go ahead and everybody wants to, we'll start with Charles there and we'll go around. Everybody just kind of what you use it or your ideas or what you just some quick things out, and we do have to wrap up the show, unfortunately.
So these days, I mean, like Michelle, I've been printing for almost a decade, and these days I mostly print stuff when I need something. I don't print every single day. I haven't used my printer behind me in probably 2 months, but when I do print stuff, it's for things like GoPro mounts, or if I'm working on an electronics project for a video or for my employer or whatever, and I need a case to put my project in or something, I'll just design something up really quick in Fusion 360 and print it out. But I also use it for repair stuff around the house. A couple weeks ago, we had a adapter that holds the shower handle on in our shower break. And I eventually replaced it with a new piece from the faucet company. But in 20 minutes, I'd designed and 3D printed a thing to get my shower back up and running in the middle of the night. So I would love to do the large scale stuff like Michelle does. For some reason, every time I try a print that's over 12 hours, it fails at about 12 hours. And I lose a spool of filament and a lot of time, and I get frustrated and throw it in my box of scrap, which I have a big box of that. And
11:59, it fails.
Yeah, usually around 12 to 13 hours, my prints fail, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I don't attempt those very often, so it's probably just all just random happenings. But I kind of blame myself for those sometimes.
Oh, thank you. And let's go next to Javier. Oh my God, I'm never gonna.
Javi.
It's all the same.
Javi's all you get.
Just don't call me late for dinner. I'm good. Basically, I have absolutely no plans. Being a hobbyist, just whatever flights of fancy come into my mind, that's what I'm going to be pumping out. I was actually considering running a couple 4-gauge electrical cables to the Monoprice and seeing if I can get it to start melting titanium, turn it into a titanium 3D printer. But we'll work on that.
You never know. I saw a guy on Facebook today has his own nuclear reactor running in his house.
Cool. I'll tap him for power.
He still has solar panels on his roof. I don't know. Matt, what are some ways you envision using 3D printing, or types of solutions and things?
So of course, myself being the noob to the group, maybe not the newest. I think we had one that was a couple days shy of the way that I was. And hey, you're the host.
I'm actually the newest here.
But besides that, the biggest thing I want to do, I got a ton of upgrades to the machine itself that I want to do. And then after that, I kind of have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about the amount of people that have said to me, well, that's only going to be useful for printing little trinkets and stupid shit. So, I've got upgrades, a few things to my house that I want to do that are simple little projects. I've got, I want to be able to prove this machine is useful and not just for printing garbage.
That just made me think, like custom light switches, everything.
Yeah. The amount of stuff. Besides that, I would also like to try to develop some sort of a niche business where I could find either one or several companies that really need specific custom parts done that I can make for them, and they pay well. I hope they pay a whole lot for it, essentially.
And I think that comes back to what Michelle was saying about how learning design really opens up those doors.
Yeah,
people want something and you can make it. There it is.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
And Zach, how about yourself?
I actually have a couple things. I've printed a couple upgrades to the printer already. I think my main thing, the main reason for buying one was I have a Honda Civic, and I actually want to replace the emblems with orange emblems or red emblems. So I figured I could make the Honda symbol and do it. And then also on top of that, I have a teardrop trailer that I built. So I want to add like little things for like toothbrushes and little handles and stuff like that I can make with the CNC. So just little things like that I think this thing will go a long way with. And I'm also doing GoPro mounts. Those things are great.
And I think I'm gonna wrap this show up with the threat the threat of Michelle and her new gun in her hand all the time.
I mean, you've seen all the costuming stuff that I do, and this is another 3D printed prop that we've done, and that's great, and I love 3D printing for that. But like everyone else is saying, the useful, functional things are really what make the technology useful. Let's ignore the part where one of my 3D printers, I made all of the 3D printed parts on it on my other machine. Like I said earlier, I want to make a mount for a power strip that keeps moving around. We made an AC dial for the car. We have a shopsmith that we got a couple months ago, and I know we're going to need to make replacement parts for that, and 3D printing is a possible avenue for that. You can do so much with it other than, like you said, printing trinkets, or even something like this where I'm a sculptor and I'm doing an art business here. The limitation of 3D printing is how creative you can be with finding solutions.
I love that. And I want to end on that sentence. So thank you everybody for coming out tonight. I'm super excited myself about getting into 3D printing. I have a CNC machine, and the whole production machine in the house concept alone is just mind-blowing and extends the reach of solutions. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming out. Thanks, everybody in the chat and the audience, everybody, for coming out and listening. Like I said at the start of the show, I'm going to be focused on this a little bit for the next while in my life. So this will probably be the show for the next while, talking about design concepts, 3D printers, production machines, and the like. So if you're interested in that stuff, stay tuned. If you're not, and you made it this far, I don't understand, but you can skip the thumbnails on the shows on my channel if you don't like it, or unsubscribe. I don't know. So with that said, thanks everybody. I'll see you next week, and appreciate everybody coming out.